on Sunday, April 2nd, President William RUTO declared that he was ready to hold dialogue with the opposition chief, that is RAILA ODINGA, 2 weeks after the country had experienced a protest that saw destructions of property and deaths. 3 deaths so far reported. That is official number of deaths that have been reported so far are 3. Tonight, I am joined by Suba Churchill, the Executive Director at Kenya National Civil Society Center, to help us understand really what this bipartisan approach means for Kenya. Welcome back again to studio, Suba. I understand that you're not a new face here.
Yes.
Karibu tena. So
you.
Let's just get right into this discussion. What's your view on this bipartisan approach?
First of all, a bipartisan approach means that 2 different parties that are not agreeing on things, that do not agree on certain issues or policies, agree to cooperate with a view to resolving them. And as a country, this probably could be, we could say, is the 18th time that such approaches have been adopted. You remember way back from our history during the independence, there were disagreements between KANU on the one hand and KADU, the one that brought together communities, Kenyan communities that believed at that time that they were conglomeration of minorities that were threatened by the convergence of the majorities. And so there was need for a bipartisan approach, especially when, you know, our founding fathers of this country were to go to the Lancaster conferences. Because if they weren't divided, then it means the British colonial authorities would have had their way. Fast forward to 2007, we had similar, you know, disagreements post-election, and there was a deeply entrenched feeling, complete with some elements of evidence that the elections had been rigged. And so there was, you know, a lot of violence, which finally culminated into the intervention of the international community, so that the 2 parties revolving around a Party of National Unity led by the late President Mwai Kibaki, and then the CORD, Coalition for Reforms and Democracy, revolving around the leadership of Raila ODINGA, agreed to sit down, and those discussions were facilitated by the late Kofi Annan. And so that one could talk about, see that as, you know, a bipartisan approach. Again, this year, as you have rightly pointed out, His Excellency the President, William RUTO, has suggested that, you know, rather than have the protests that were turning ugly and violent, that he and his government go into a bipartisan approach. And so we saw today, immediately on that same material day, I think yesterday, the President met the leadership of the ruling coalition of the party within Parliament, and perhaps, you know, strategizing and briefing them on what his views, what he meant when he suggested a bipartisan approach. Today we saw the leadership of the Azimio One Kenya coalition party also coming out to say, yes, we welcome this goodwill, but we also have our view. So you are already beginning to see that these are parties that do not, you know, see eye to eye on a number of issues, or even the process itself. But that's the nature of bipartisan processes.
Right.
And so at some point, of course, they love to sit down. A lot of haggling, you will hear a lot of that. Bipartisan, by merely, you know, coming to accept that they are going for a bipartisan approach, is not the end of differences. It basically means there is a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And that ceasefire provides an opportunity and a platform for, the two divergent opinions to come to a negotiating table. Yes.
Now that you have mentioned that the country has witnessed bipartisan talks in previous years, what is likely to change for 2023 to make sure that we do not have these talks after every election?
In an evolving democracy like ours, Kenya is a very nascent democracy. Our notions of multipartyism, even as Kenyans, what elections mean to us is completely different from the ideal. And so we cannot say with finality that by this time, or let 2023 be the last time we are having these bipartisan talks. And it is not that countries that are more advanced in democratic practices, like, most countries in Europe, today people are reluctant to cite America because America is having its own fair share of challenges. We today witnessed, an immediate former president of the United States of America, being taken to court to answer to charges of very, very serious, criminal allegations. And so we would hope that, and because all these are election related, they are related to power, we would want to believe that we will come up with a framework, especially around the elections, and especially around the election management body that we currently call the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, one that can deliver. And if I were to share with you my opinion, because I'm also an opinion leader in my own right, I do not think that the IEBC should be established in the manner in which it is provided for in the Constitution. IEBC is one of the constitutional commissions, and the manner in which it is set up is the same manner we establish the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. In the same manner we have established, other constitutional commissions, Parliamentary Service Commission, and so on. IEBC performs such important functions that, its establishment and its reconstitution must involve, the different stakeholder interests. And I think when the people that will be coming together to represent the Kenya Kwanza side and the Azimio la Umoja side come together, and we hope, civil society, the religious sector, that they'll come to the realization that IEBC performs such fundamental functions as registration of voters, as, compilation of the voters register, as, demarcation of electoral units. And, our resources today are allocated based on, those electoral units. And so they always say that, with power comes resources. And so Kenyans will always contest power, and especially the presidency, because of the influence that office has. So we want to believe that we can go back to the 2002 scenario when we had an election management body, then called Electoral Commission of Kenya, in which each of the leading political parties had a representative in the commission. But this process where we have the president, playing a very overarching role, will always, render those who compete with him
mistrust,
irrelevant. Your fate is sealed as long as you allow a sitting president, to play the overarching role that office plays in the appointment of members of the IB Commission and the chairman.
All right, now that opposition has a seat at the table in finding ways on how the reconstitution of REBC will be done, do you think this is a step ahead to ensure that there would be free and fair election if opposition is indeed given a chance to take part in the reconstitution of REBC?
Yes, it is one of the key elements of ensuring and insulating the 2027 elections against possible, interference and ensuring that they are free. But there are so many other factors. Even if you had an independent commission that we desire, and in fact, the wording in the Constitution is Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, though, of course, as to whether it's independent is something else. But there are many other factors. Citizens also need to be, alive to and internalize democratic ideals. We have just made reference to the 2022 elections, in which even those who were elected, William Ruto, with due respect to His Excellency, only got 7.1 million votes. RAILA, if we go by the figures that were published, got 6.9.
Yeah.
Now, there were 8 million Kenyans who registered as voters. More than the 7.1 that the president got, more than the 6.9 that the leading opposition party or coalition got. So when you have such a situation, you cannot talk of free and fair elections, because in a free and fair elections, everybody should first of all register as a voter.
Yeah.
So, but we have a situation where even those who registered, more than, almost 3/4 of the total number of registered voters never showed up.
Okay.
And so when we talk about free and fair elections, it's about universal suffrage, that every adult male and female citizen will have, the requisite documents, including identification documents that enable them to register as voters and feel motivated and incentivized to turn up and vote.
Yeah.
Now, when you have 8 million, a lot of them young people who do not appreciate the importance of going to cast your vote, then that is not free and fair elections.
All right.
And that is why, when I saw High Excellency, the U.S. ambassador to Kenya saying, the 2022 elections were the freest and the fairest, I beg to differ.
All right, now that aside, let's now talk about the demands that took the Azimio coalition to the streets. These were the cost of living, reconstitution of REBC, and opening of the IEBC servers. But now the bipartisan talks only focuses on the reconstitution of the IEBC. What happens to these other demands?
You see, President William Ruto is a politician, and that is how it begins. The Azimio had all those 4 issues. Remember, there was also the issue of, compromising members of parliament elected on opposition party tickets that has rendered, parliament predominantly Kenya Kwanza, and leaving, the Azimio side with fewer numbers. And at times, in most instances, these issues are decided by the vote. So what does President William Samoei do? He already has reduced the issues because he is not keen on opening the server. But you and me know that Article 35 of the Constitution empowers every citizen access to information held by the state or any agency of the state. And that's the basis on which anybody, leave alone Azimio, anybody, nobody needs to protest. One just needs to say, out of curiosity, I want to access the server because the server just holds information.
But the servers were opened by the Supreme Court.
No, they were not. You see what happened? Not everything was opened. The Supreme Court, Azimio side wanted the servers opened, but the Supreme Court only allowed in select because they wanted just to sample. So the server was not opened. And part of the reason it was not opened is because the people who hold the copyright, these things are, held abroad. I don't know which country it is. I think it is France or wherever. It has issues of copyright. So no server, and there was a letter. They wrote a letter.
Is there proof?
There is a letter. They wrote to say we cannot allow unlimited access to the server because of copyright issues. So on that, I know Azimio is right that no server was open. In any case, why should it be closed? Of course, the cost of maintaining it may be expensive, keeping it open. there may be interferences. But when there is demand, Article 35 of the Constitution that gives people the right to access information held by the state or any of its agencies applies. That law, that article of the Constitution is still operational. So RUTO, in his political mind, already removes that. In the issue of cost of living, of course, he promised that within 100 days, he even had a figure at which people will be buying 2 packets of maize meal, and this figure was 70 Kenya shillings. Now you and I know that the Kenya Kwanza government is almost in its 7th or 8th month after taking oath of office.
Yeah, 7th.
7th. Now that, even if you are poor in maths, you'd know is much more than the 100 days within which the Kenya Kwanza government would reduce the cost. So he knows that he has not fulfilled that, so he's removing it. But it's a very pertinent issue. So whether the president, because remember the president was also very clever. He said, I suggest. Now that is a mere suggestion, despite the fact that he's the president. When the group will meet, Azimio will still bring back the issues, and don't be surprised if the issues become even more than those that Azimio raised, because Kenyans have their grievances. I've already seen religious leaders suggesting that let everybody be brought on board. We in the civil society also have our issues. There is a law that was passed in this country way back in 2013, was assented by former President Mwai Kibaki, that has not been operationalized, the Public Benefit Organizations Act. So we will also be bringing our agenda and asking the government to implement. All right,
in the interest of time, now I want you to have a proper take off from the studio. Now, should a common ground not be arrived at in this reconstitution of IEBC, what do you foresee for Kenyans now that we just witnessed Kenyans go to the streets? And Azimio la Umoja, the opposition chief, said should the demands not be met in 1 week time, they are going back to the streets. What do you foresee for Kenya should these demands not be met?
Of course, there'll be a lot of pressure on both sides. I believe that even what transpired on Sunday was as a result of a lot of pressure. But it will also test the sincerity and honesty of the president and even the leadership of Azimio and even Kenyans themselves, that we need to seize the momentum created by this ceasefire. And ensure that we bring on board those issues, including what made 8 million Kenyans who registered as voters not to turn out, and what made even the other larger millions of Kenyans who did not bother to register. Remember, IEBC was expecting I don't know how many millions, but only a small percentage registered. Yeah. So who are those? And why didn't they register? And we need to interest them, because democracy is about public participation. It's about everybody being a stakeholder and everybody having a voice in the day-to-day management of public affairs.
Right. Thank you so much, Suba Churchill, for making time for us tonight. That is the Executive Director, Kenya National Civil Society Center. We appreciate your time.